We have a team agreement. Everybody signs the team agreement, and we did it together. It's 5 things that we all agreed to do, how we treat each other in meetings and how we go about our business. Everybody signs off on it. If they don't follow the team agreement, they're not going to work for us. And by the way, there are a lot of people who aren't working for us because they didn't follow the team agreement. I don't care how good they are.
Welcome to Corporate Competitor, presented by Forbes Books, the podcast where executives share how the lessons they learned playing sports shaped their leadership. We've had executives like Delta Airlines CEO Ed Bastian, who played baseball, Bank of America CEO Brian Moynihan, who played rugby at Brown. And today we welcome Syd Kitson, Chairman and CEO of Kitson Partners and the visionary behind Babcock Ranch, America's first solar-powered town. Before building one of the most ambitious, sustainable communities in the country, Syd was in the trenches of the NFL as an offensive lineman for the Green Bay Packers and the Dallas Cowboys. A graduate of Wake Forest, where he earned the Distinguished Alumni Award, Syd's football journey is a testament to adaptability and grit. Having played wide receiver, tight end, and guard, that same mindset has fueled his success in real estate, and I'm excited to talk to him about that today. Now, enjoy this episode, and as always, you can download my notes at corporatecompetitorpodcast.com/notes. Syd, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's great to be here, Don. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
We're going to have fun because I've learned so much about you in prep for today that I know leadership lessons are going to be in every question. But I wanted to start by talking about the incredible community that your company developed in Southwest Florida. You set out to build Babcock Ranch as a hurricane-resistant town in Florida, right? And spoiler alert for our listeners, it's been an incredible success. Featured on CNN, featured in so many media outlets, because when Hurricane Ian tore through the area in 2022, Babcock Ranch never lost power, water, not even the internet, just as you had designed it to. And that wasn't true for many of the communities nearby. Can you walk me through the vision you had that led to this project, and what going through the process taught you about leadership?
It's really, it is a remarkable story, and just, how many people from the beginning really didn't believe that we could do what we said we were going to do. As a matter of fact, I would say 95% of the people we talked to just, said this is never going to happen. Just to put it in perspective, we bought 91,000 acres. That's 143 square miles on an area 5 times the size of the island of Manhattan. So it's a big piece of property. And then we sold 73,000 acres to the state of Florida in the largest land purchase in the history of the state, and it still is today.
Wow.
So then we ended up with 18,000 acres. And I'll tell you, Don, what's so amazing about it is just knowing that huge amount of land, that 73,000 acres is going to be there forever, never to
Protected,
be built on.
never can be developed.
Never to be developed. This could be there for my kids, grandkids, great-grandkids. Just at the end of the day, 90% of the original ranch is in preservation forever. So, when people ask me, what are you most proud of? That's certainly, one of them. And then we set out to build a new city. And here's where it gets a little bit, I would say, where the doubters came out and said, there's just no way you're going to pull us off. We wanted to build a new city that could work hand in hand with the environment, not against it, but with the environment. And then we wanted to be the most sustainable, the most resilient, and the most innovative new town that's ever been built. And I remember early on, I was talking about how we wanted to create this solar-powered town, right? The first solar-powered town in America. And again, the roadblocks along the way were extraordinary. It took 8 years to get it done, but we are now the first, and I think the only solar-powered town in the entire country. And I'm very proud of that. We have 700,000 panels on 840 acres that put out 150 megawatts that power our town. And I'm very, very proud of that. But going back to your earlier point, resiliency was one of our key initiatives to make sure that Babcock Ranch would be safe. And we started right from the very beginning So, and then all of our buildings were designed to be handle, Category 5 winds. So to your point before, Hurricane Ian was really our first big test, and I'll never forget this, Don. I remember I was at I have a home at Babcock, and I, for the most part, I lived there basically full time. And I remember when that storm crossed Cuba as a Category 1 hurricane, and it was headed right for the Panhandle. But when it went past and over Cuba, it hit those warm Gulf waters, and it's almost like it exploded into the strong Category 4 hurricane. And so it was headed to the Panhandle, and then it was headed to the Big Bend, and then it was headed to Tampa, and then it took a right-hand turn right into Fort Myers Beach. And I remember sitting in my home, and I'm listening to the weather person, and he says, "Well, it's headed right for Babcock Ranch." Every time a hurricane is predicted to come anywhere near us, I bring everybody together. So we have our engineers, I bring the land planners, I bring in all of our team, I bring in the contractors. And we all have a meeting about, because we're under construction, there's a lot of work going on. Babcock is huge. It's a huge project. It's a city. And I always want to identify those areas that could be a potential problem of areas that are maybe under construction. And then I said, okay, I want to identify those areas because I want to drive those during the storm. I want to see how they react. I want to learn from it. You always got to learn. How can we get better? It's not a matter of, okay, we designed it so it's going to be perfect, but rather, okay, let's learn from it. And no matter what happens, how can we be better? But somebody has to go out there and take a look at it. So I said, well, that should be me because, I live here. And oh, by the way, I've got 5,000 neighbors. At the time, it was 5,000. We have 12,000 people live here now, but at the time, I had 5,000 neighbors that I all promised could shelter at home, every one of them. And so I remember when the storm hit us, and and the winds started to very quickly pick up, and in no time we were getting sustained winds of 100 miles an hour, sustained winds. And so I'm out driving, and I'm checking out all of these hot spots with the rain and the wind and anything that I thought might be a problem. And as I was driving back to my home, a gust of wind came, and there were gusts of about 150 miles an hour. It actually started to tilt my car. And right in front of me, I watched a truck just topple over. So at that point, I said, I think I'm going to go back to the house. I think I'll ride this storm out there for the rest of the way. So here it was. This was showtime for us, and that thing sat on top of us for 8 hours. And at one point, you couldn't see because it was so intense. And but the strangest part about that whole thing was we never lost power. So the next morning when the sun came up, and obviously we were up all night, I got into my truck and I went off to drive Babcock Ranch, and I spent 5 hours. I drove every neighborhood, spoke to a couple thousand people along the way. They were kind of stunned. People were just outside looking around because we had almost no damage, very little damage, never lost power. Yet all around us, devastation, floods, loss of life. Yet here we were, this almost like this oasis where it worked. And there's always lessons learned, but I'll never forget the look on the people's faces. And we have this thing called Food Truck Friday. And because of all the issues people were having around us, our people were opening their homes to the linemen from FPL. They were opening up their homes to people who were in the shelter. We have actually a Category 5 shelter on site where people were evacuated to, and people were trying to help out, providing food, clothing, anything people needed. The things that we had worked so hard on in being environmentally responsible and thinking about our energy and education and really focusing on transportation and technology and health and wellness. And of course, number one was storm safety. Those things really have resonated and have worked. And even though maybe it wasn't easy, well, it was extremely difficult to get these things done. I mean, unbelievably difficult. But every single one of them paid off. And at the end of the day, The people who live at Babcock Ranch, if you ask them, they'll tell you one of the reasons they come there is, being part of the outdoors, being part of the environment, but they feel like they're in a safe community.
Wow. So I want to go backwards though a little bit because as fantastic as that story is, and by the way, I made a note here, like you always have to, as a leader, you also have to be willing to drive in the storm, right? You have to get out there when the truck in front of you turns over. Maybe that's the time to turn back, but be willing to go out and drive in the storm. That's really important. But was the idea of Babcock? Was there something that happened to you to some property that you were engaged in? Was there something that made you question whether something like this was even possible? Because I love thinking through the minds of leaders as well and understanding where does this idea even come from?
What happened was, when I was living in West Palm Beach and we had very little activity. But then in '04 and '05, we got just clobbered. I just remember looking at the devastation, and we developed a community called Ibis Golf and Country Club. And the first thing I noticed was all of the non-native plant material fell over. And I looked at that and I went, well, then why do we have it? Why are we planting non-native, trees here that are like big umbrellas? And as soon as a windstorm comes, they're laying on their side. So after those storms, it was like the whole area had been flattened, and the loss of electricity was really tough on everybody because it gets so hot, and it's difficult for people to find food and gas and all those things that you deal with after a major hurricane. And I just remember sitting there thinking, there's got to be a better way to do this. There just has to be. We're clearly not prepared. We haven't thought through what the issues are from a hurricane like this. And one of those lessons, as an example, is Babcock. We require native plant materials. You have to plant native plant materials. And the reason is because they're good in wet weather, they're good in dry weather, and they're good in wind. But I think more importantly, Don, it was clear we could do it better.
What a great lesson, though. You think about it, right? I mean, yes, somebody might want a plant that they really love from some other place, and it looks really awesome. But but those plants that grew here naturally are the ones that are positioned to survive, right? They're the ones that are going to make it work. And so, what a genius way to actually take a bad situation, see something from it that you can learn from. We're talking about Babcock. You received a lot of publicity after Ian, and I loved Time Magazine naming you Dreamer of the Year in 2023. Dreamer of the Year. I love that it's an award that recognizes people who chase ideas that inspire others. But a lot of entrepreneurs listen to this podcast, a lot of leaders who are aspiring to the next level. What can we take from your story as you try to bring your own idea to life?
You have to understand that anything that you're going to do that's innovative is going to be really, really hard. But I will tell you this, through everything that we went through to make Babcock Ranch a reality, and we don't have enough time, in a week to tell about all the stories and all the things that we went through to build a new city in Florida. In which the roadblocks were very significant. But I'm certain that you've heard this from a lot of people that you've talked to, and that is that journey that we went through together as a group. I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. It was death-defying. It was difficult, to say the least. But all the problem solving, all the creativity that came from it, having a singular vision and saying, we're going to get that done. And what we did was we set a series of goals and things that we had to do. And we had a list that we created as a group. And each one of these steps along the way, we had to accomplish. And if we didn't, by the way, the whole thing would have come apart. And we're talking about millions of dollars that were invested to make this happen. But we had a group of people that were all determined to make it happen. And I think that's one of the keys. If you can't get everybody to understand what your vision is, and if you can't put together a real plan, a real set of goals to achieve that, it's just not going to happen. You really, everybody has to be heading in the right direction, particularly when you're trying to do something as that's different and innovative, hasn't been done before. You really have to focus.
They have to be very clearly crafted. They have to be specific and actionable. People have to be able to wrap their arms around them.
That's 100% correct. So if you have a dream and you have a big idea, a big dream, and you want to make that happen, great, and totally encourage it and go after it. But it has to be grounded in reality. You have to literally sit there and go, all right, we got this dream. Now, how are we going to do it? So here's the end game. Here's where we're going to end up. How do we get there? And setting that vision, but also reinforcing it the whole way. Because when you have those really bad down moments, and you watch and you see your team just sort of, you can see they're deflated because something happened unexpected, and oh my gosh, this whole thing is going to end. It's not going to work. We're done. That's when you got to step and go, no, we're going to make it happen. And here's how we're going to make it happen. And let's get after it. Okay, we have a bump. But you know what? That's not going to stop us. We're going to get after it. We're going to come together and figure this thing out. That journey is really special. And when you go through that kind of hell and you come out the other end, and I learned this, certainly, my days at Wake Forest and others, but when you come out the other end and you can see the results of all that hard work, there's nothing better in the world.
Mm-hmm. I love it. You set the table there. We're going to talk a little sports here. We love to talk about successful teams. And yes, you had Wake Forest in your background. You have the NFL. We made reference to that. But I want to go back to your days at Providence High School. Because did I read this right? Your senior year, you outscored your opponents 207-0 in the first 5 games of that season.
We had a pretty good team. It was a great. We did lose 2 games though to the same team, and that was tough for us.
But what were the habits? What made that team great? What was it that they did so differently in your experience that you could look back to and talk about?
I always tell people, if you're done with the game and you're done playing that game and you have anything left in your tank, that means you didn't leave it on the field. I remember, when I used to talk to some of the high school kids and, after a game, some of them weren't even tired. And I go, well, if you're not completely, totally exhausted, that means you didn't give it everything you had on that field. And, but there was, the coaches were just absolutely outstanding. But I think the one thing that they taught me that was consistent with pretty much every great coach I ever had was the passion that they had. Their passion, and it wasn't just to win, but their love of the game, but even more so shaping the lives of these young men and women that ultimately they coached, and then to watch them, succeed, not just on the field, but then in life, in their business world, in their personal life. And I was very, very, very lucky. And back in those days, Don, you'll appreciate this. They were not afraid to get on us. And they got on us hard. But
today you go in the transfer portal if they got on you, right? It's like, excuse me, I'm out of here, coach.
If they hurt your feelings, you just leave. Not in those days. But I'll never forget this one coach I had who was absolutely phenomenal. And he got on my case constantly. I mean, he just used to beat me up. And he looked at my face.
Football coach?
Football coach, yeah. This is in high school. And he just beat me up and was on me and on me. And he saw my face, and I had this, probably that look like, what was me kind of a thing. And he came up to me and he grabbed my face mask, and I'll paraphrase it because I can't use the language that he actually used. But to summarize, he said to me, look, he goes, you have the talent to be a great player. He goes, the minute I stop yelling at you is the minute I don't care. He said, I'm going to be on you even harder. And it's because I love you and I want to see you succeed. And I will tell you, the one thing that I learned from that point forward, was that if you really care about somebody, you want somebody to be successful, you're going to tell them the truth and you're going to give it to them straight and you're going to challenge them, just like people have challenged me. And I like it when I get challenged or you get that constructive criticism because it's really showing that you care. And so those are some of the lessons I learned that really stuck with me throughout my entire life.
Before we continue, I want to remind you that if one of your 2025 goals is writing a book, but you don't know where to start, I'm here to help. In my new role as publisher at Forbes Books, I'm working alongside a world-class team to guide aspiring authors like you through the process of getting published. Whether it's a story, a big idea, or a project close to your heart, now's the time to make it happen. Just visit forbesbooks.com/Don to get started. So a theme that kept coming up as I was reading about your football career was adaptability. I love that you are you will fit. You are like the ultimate Lego piece. You went from wide receiver, right? That sleek, fast wide receiver to tight end, a little more bulky, by eating 5 meals a day. And then just when you're leading the ACC in receptions at Wake Forest, the coach comes and asks you to become an offensive guard, right?
Yeah.
The big ugly. What did those constant role changes teach you about adapting to serve the greater good? And how's that shaped the way you lead in business today?
Well, I think, when my coaches approached me in each of those instances to change a position, it can be somewhat, I don't, traumatic is too big of a word maybe, but it does rock your world. I remember when I was a receiver, and look, like anybody else, being a tight end was my dream, and I just loved the position. I also, kind of dreamt of scoring touchdowns in the NFL and or in college, and all the kind of fun things that come from scoring touchdowns. And I can assure you, there's nothing fun being an offensive lineman.
Offensive guard, that's right. There's not, the celebrations are slightly different.
Very different. And the only time anybody notices you is when you're called for holding. So
that's right.
That's pretty much it. And John Madden later on obviously sort of brought the offensive line to the forefront, but not back in those days.
So I want to ask that greater good question. How do you take what you learned there, right? Being willing to give up your end zone dances and all the incredible things you would have probably done. I can only imagine you with an end zone dance. And suddenly now you're an offensive guard, being willing to do what's good for the team as opposed to yourself. How do you teach that to those who you get to work with today?
It's kind of like trying to connect the dots, Don, from where you are today. You look at all the decisions you made over your life. I certainly wouldn't be sitting here today. I don't believe if I hadn't moved, believe it or not, if I hadn't moved from tight end to offensive guard, who knows where I would be today. And so I can use that as an example of, what, this is better for the company. It's better for what we're trying to do. And at the end of the day, it's going to be better for you. Because generally when you're put into a different position, it's because, and I tell people this all the time, even our own company, when we make a change, it's because this is going to be better for you. This is what you're good at. This is what you can excel at, rather than, what you had before. And I have a very specific example in my own organization where we had a controller here, and he was great at the numbers. He was very good at what he did. But what I knew he'd be even better at was operations. And he did not want to do it. He did not want to do it. And I actually used that example when I moved. They moved me to offensive guard. And so I convinced him to do it. And here we are. I want to say it's maybe 5 years later, and he's an all-star.
You know what I love in listening to your answer to that is something tells me Coach Makovic didn't pull you aside and lay it all out, and here's how it's going to be better for you. He just said, Kitson, you're a guard, right?
Pretty much.
Yeah. I would guess there was a lot of cajoling, and let me tell you how this is going to be great for your career, because that's what it was at the time. Today, you recognize that in order to make something like that happen, you actually do have to lay out a vision for them not just for the team, but for them. And so it's a different leadership style, but
Totally.
but same outcome.
You're 100% right. Coach Makovic, and most coaches back in those days, I can remember 2 weeks before the season was going to start, my senior year. So now I'm an offensive guard, right? And I've been playing guard for months, not years, months. I remember he comes up to me in the locker room and he goes, Kitson, you ever snapped? And I said, no, coach, I've never snapped, and for field goals and extra points. And I said, no, I've never done that. And, never even tried it. He goes, well, you got 2 weeks to be ready because you're my snapper. And I thought he was kidding. I started laughing. I said, I started laughing. I said, Coach, I, I've never snapped a ball in my life. I've never snapped for an extra point or field goal or anything in my life. He goes, you got 2 weeks to figure it out. And he walks out. I literally had 2 weeks to figure out how to snap a ball. And what was interesting, and I don't know what he knew but we ended up winning, I don't know, 2 or 3 of our games with last minute field goals that year. And I think he saw that I loved to throw the ball when I was a tight end. And I'd thrown thousands and thousands and thousands of footballs, training to be a tight end. And I guess that was, but again, back in those days, he didn't ask me. He said, "You're my snapper for extra points and field goals." And I ended up doing it in the NFL too. But I can remember thinking when I was a kid, there's probably nothing worse than snapping for extra points and field goals, because back in those days, if you recall,
They
the
had
guy
somebody
would
right
line
on
up.
top of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now you're not allowed to do that in today's game, but
Today, right.
back in those days, you could line up right across, and they would just tee off on you,
And the second that ball moved, somebody was going to be, there was head-to-head collision. Yeah.
head-to-head collision.
Coach Makovic once said about you, I was reading an article, he called you one of the most unselfish players he ever coached, and he said that your leadership came through in your work ethic. How did that high compliment, obviously, from
Yeah,
a man like him, but
yeah.
is there a moment in your business life where you found that mindset, that work ethic, that being willing to be unselfish, is there a moment where that shone through for you as a business leader?
And Don, this is going to sound crazy, but every day of my life, and I'm absolutely dead serious. The sacrifices that you have to make early on in my career. The first year that I was out of football and I got into real estate, it was a very good year. It was 1986. 1 year later was one of the greatest stock market crashes in history. In Black Monday, October of 1987, and then everything I'd worked for that first year then just completely evaporated. I ended up working. I probably got 3 hours of sleep a night for about 6 years. I had 2 little kids. Never filed bankruptcy in my life on anything, and I wasn't going to. So I had to work through quite a few things. I learned a lot very, very, very early on in my life. But that idea of putting your head down and working and getting it done. By the way, it was the one thing I felt like it was one of the big advantages I felt like I had. And that is I always felt like I could outwork everybody. Now, I know that that's probably not true, but in my mind, it was true.
Right. Yeah. What matters is what's in your mind. That's pretty
Right.
powerful.
Right.
Drafted by the Packers, third round, 1980 draft, 61st overall. I'm sure you probably know the statistics of all the 60 people in front of you. But you ended up playing 50 NFL games, and during your time with the Packers, your head coach was Bart Starr. What, if anything, give me a story, something that you took away from his leadership, and obviously he learned to lead from Vince Lombardi, maybe one of the greatest of all time. Is there something that you learned from Bart that changed the way you would grow to lead, even today?
Yes, absolutely. There were 2 things that happened. One time I'm walking down the hall. He's coming the other direction. And he goes, Sid, how you doing? And I go, and I said something like, well, I'm hanging in there, coach. And he stops in his tracks and he looked at me and goes, what do you mean you're hanging in there? You're playing in the NFL. You're one of an elite group of people. Every day should be a great day for you. And so he went on and sort of gave me a real dressing down. I'll never forget it as long as I live. And to this day, if somebody asks me how I'm doing, I'm doing great. I'm alive. I'm doing what I want to do. I mean, I've got a great family. I'm doing great. But I think what the advice he gave me, it was really incredible. So I hadn't been playing offensive line very long, and I didn't talk about it much. I don't think anybody understood that. I had 1 year in college as an offensive lineman, basically. And so I had a lot to learn. In my rookie year, I was struggling, when camp came in. Not rookie camp. I was okay in rookie camp, but when the veterans came in, I really struggled. And so after a few weeks, he calls me into his office and he says, "Sid, you're trying to be great all at once." He goes, "It's just not going to work." He goes, "What you need to do is I want you to just think about one thing and work on it for a week, whether it be that step you need to take or whatever it is, but focus on that one thing and make it become a habit. And then when you feel like you've mastered that, do the next thing and go on to the next thing." He goes, "And I'm going to tell you, one day you're going to wake up and you're going to be a whole lot more comfortable in your position." And so I did. And it just that one piece of advice uh, really impacted me, not only in the NFL, but later on in life when I realized, and particularly when things are going really, really bad, I was able to compartmentalize things and say, okay, all the bad stuff that's going on, I have to just methodically work through it. And I convinced myself
But
that
not all at once.
not all at once, because you can do it all at once. If you try and do it all at once, you're going to fail. That's the one thing I can always tell everybody. I said, if you're afraid to fail, you're never going to be successful. That means you're not going to take any risk and you're not willing to face those consequences. Because every time I failed, I learned, and I learned a lot, and would not be here today about those things that perhaps happened to me. But going back to Bart's advice, it's those little things that you learn from people, coaches in particular. For me, that there was a handful of them that to this day I never forget.
Hmm. Yeah, I love it. That's such a great line. I'm gonna hold on to that one. I love it. But you and I had a chance to meet as members of a Leadership Florida executive class.
Right.
Um, so, as a leader, how important is it for you to find places where you can be amongst peers, where you can learn, where you can share? Often leadership's a very lonely place.
Yeah,
And what do you carve out time on a regular basis to go engage yourself with others that can open your mind?
I do. Because you want to be challenged. You want to understand what other people are going through and what the issues they're facing and how they deal with those issues. There is a commonality, amongst businesses of issues that we all face. Leadership Florida was a great example. You and I spent time together and learned a lot about what you do and how you do it, and it was inspirational to me. And then some of the other leaders in the room that had been through so much.
Well, that leads to a really great question. Many leaders today talk about what we have in common, right? Um, in my conversations, many of them are struggling with holding their team together, retaining kind of
Yeah,
key employees, especially in this day and age when it feels as if the practice of moving from one job to another, it doesn't seem to bother employees, right? It's just uh, someone offered me $1 more, I'm gone.
yeah.
Um, what are some of the ways you, as a leader, work to keep your team engaged and together?
So we have every quarter we have an event with all our employees, every single one of them. We bring everybody together, and it might be one time. It could be on for a charity event where we're working at a local charity and doing cleanup of their facilities or whatever it is
That's
they want us to do. We
Is
we
this the
do it.
day of service?
Day of
Is this?
service. Yeah.
I read about it and it's so fascinating what you do. And that you, like you said, when you're trying to tell people you're serious about it, it's not telling them, it's showing them that you're serious about it.
Exactly. Exactly. And so that day of service is, I think, the most popular one that we do by far. People love it. Now, what that does is, though, it brings all the people in our organization, a couple hundred people, 150, whatever it is, and they all come together, and they may not know each other so well because it's more on the phone, or, where they're in one office and somebody's in another office, but everybody gets together and you get to know each other. And you do that 4 times a year, and all of a sudden everybody really looks forward to it. And we have a picnic, a family picnic. We bring everybody together, and they bring their families, and it's just so much fun seeing the kids and everybody interact with everybody. But I think creating that culture, and then it gives me an opportunity to talk to everybody at one time, so they can hear from me what it is that our mission is, what our vision is. I always start with our mission statement, and
So
I
it doesn't
talk about
matter.
it.
Some people might have been there 20 years. They've heard you say it a bunch of times, but you still, that's the way you open every one of these conversations.
Absolutely. And they got to hear it from my soul. They got to know that it's not words. They got to know I'm passionate about it. And that's leadership. It starts from the top. By the way, if you don't enforce it, we have a team agreement. Everybody signs the team agreement, and we did it together. It's 5 things that we all agreed to do: how we treat each other in meetings and how we go about our business. Everybody signs off on it. If they don't follow the team agreement, they're not going to work for us. And by the way, there are a lot of people who aren't working for us because they didn't follow the team agreement. I don't care how good they are. And people in the organization have a confidence and a sense of calm to know that if there's somebody who's a troublemaker, they're just not going to be working for us for long, because it starts to ruin that culture that you're trying to create. We are not perfect. We make mistakes. We're always struggling with it. People, if you talk to any CEO, I don't care who it is, and you tell them what's your number one problem, they're going to tell you people.
Well, so what advice would you give for a leader? The listeners here are largely leaders who aspire, that wants to start what you're talking about here, wants to create that kind of a culture. Maybe a first step, something that they might do that allows people to hear, feel, understand, and live the lessons you're trying to throw out there.
Well, it starts with you as the CEO. If you don't have those qualities, I mean, no one else is going to buy off on it. So you have to start with yourself, and then as I said earlier, which I think is very important, is everyone needs to have that understanding as to what the vision is and what the mission is of the company. And I'll just a quick example, if I could. At Babcock, one of the things that we talked about is safety, safety, safety. I always ask I know the challenge is for everybody. It's very simple. Whenever you turn on the TV and there's some kind of a tragedy, all of a sudden everybody gets together and says, we need to be better. We've got to find a way to prevent this from happening in the future. And what I challenge everybody to say is why don't we ask ourselves today,
Before the tragedy.
before the tragedy? So, okay, let's simulate. Okay, if there's a problem, what could we have done to have prevented it before it happens? Why is it that everybody does all these wonderful things after it happens? So it's sort of that mindset that you're trying to get everybody to focus on and understand. But the first steps in my mind are making sure people understand from you the kind of company that you're going to create, that you want it to be, and live it yourself, and then make sure they live it.
I love it. Syd, as I mentioned, we had the chance to meet. I became a fan, started reading more about you, became an even greater fan. And at the end of this conversation, you have me. I'm willing to serve as your city council person if you need me. We'll move on down there. But I will tell you that today I'm just grateful that you opened yourself up and were a corporate competitor with us today.
Well, thank you so much, Don. It's just great to be here with you. I've said more today and talked more to you today than pretty much anybody else in my career. So publicly, but thank you for making me feel comfortable doing it. I really appreciate that.
I tell you, I was a Syd Kitson fan before, even more so now that I've had the chance to learn more of his story. But I took away four major topics, four things that I'll grow from as a result. The first was that idea of looking beyond surface level issues when something isn't gone right. What are the look deeper, try to figure things out. That whole idea of him walking through a development that he had helped build and noticing that the plants that were upset and that had been taken from the ground were actually the ones that were not part of the native culture of that area, and that would then inform him as he goes to build another development to keep native plants a part of the development. Very simple process, but it took instead of complaining about the plants that were upset, understanding what they were and thinking, how will I not do that in the future? What a great lesson, looking beyond the simple. The other thing I really loved was this idea of having clear, ambitious objectives right from the very beginning of his big project at Babcock Ranch, right? And then by having those objectives well defined, well designed, well explained, they would make sure that every action they took, every decision they made aligned directly to those goals. So by starting with having your end in mind, right? We'll quote a little Stephen Covey here. To have your end to begin with the end in mind allowed him to make sure that every action followed in that space. Very, very powerful. Then I loved the discussion about his football career and that willingness to shift roles and responsibilities to serve the greater good, and how he has now used his experience to explain that to others who he has then asked to shift their goals, their responsibilities within his organization, and that's paid dividends as well. But the willingness to see the greater good, not one that many people can imagine because we're so focused on ourselves, but the ability to do that and then to articulate it as a leader because of his experience, really powerful. And then finally, when he talked about the team culture of what he's built at Babcock Ranch, and what a foundational tool it is to actually have everybody in the organization, for example, sign actual agreements on an understanding of the culture and their commitment to those commitments, to those agreements, was extraordinarily powerful to me. I loved his day of service, the way he makes sure that they all understand what it is that we're talking about, that we're not just talking about what we believe, we're living it and we're doing it in the presence of all. What a powerful conversation. Syd Kitson is not just a great dreamer, he's a great doer. And I am a better leader because I spent this time with him today. I hope you are too. I appreciate you.